Good evening and welcome to the Johns Hopkins University Writing Webinar. The Art of Editing starts with questions, led by Sarah Harrison Smith. JHU offers free writing webinars to engineering for professional students once a semester. Now I'd like to introduce to you our presenter, Sarah Harrison Smith. Sarah is a writer and editor with a long career in media. Most recently, she worked as editorial director for books and Kindle at Amazon. Before moving to Baltimore in 2014, she spent 12 years at the New York Times, where her roles included managing editor of the New York Times Magazine. She is the author of many articles and reviews, as well as the Fact Checker's Bible, a guide to magazine research, which reflects her early career at the New Yorker. She now teaches in the Center for Leadership Education at Johns Hopkins University. Sarah, thanks for being with us tonight. You may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Haley. I'm excited to talk to everybody here about how to edit your own work. As the great writer and editor William Zinsser wrote, clear writing is the result of a lot of tinkering. And by tinkering, he meant editing. Now, as someone who spent many years as an editor, I can tell you that editing isn't easy, and it's particularly challenging when you're editing your own work. But short of hiring someone else to do it for you, that's what most writers face. They have to edit themselves. Editing might seem like a kind of abstract concept. We understand that it's an activity that makes writing better. And when we say that it makes writing better, what we really mean is that it makes reading easier. We want our readers to enjoy reading what we write, so they continue to read it and to understand what we write more readily, so they won't feel frustrated. So we can establish a set of values for our writing. If we want our readers to enjoy reading, then what we write, we want to write so that they'll continue to read it, and we need to engage them with a story. If we want our readers to understand what we write, we need to write clearly and concisely. So our shared values for writing are storytelling, clarity, and concision. That sounds simple, but again, it sounds abstract. So let me try to make it a little bit more concrete. We're all absolutely sick of masks, or maybe it's just me. They make your face hot, they make it hard to exercise, but most importantly, they make it very hard to communicate. When we wear a mask, it's difficult for other people to understand what we are saying. But if you think that we had it bad, check this out. First, can you tell me what this is? Can you put your answer in the chat? Is it, first of all, a Sesame Street prototype? Second of all, an early biohazard suit? Or thirdly, a costume from the horror film The Duck, 1927? So put your answers 1, 2, or 3 in the chat and we'll see how people do. I see, oh my goodness, okay. This is interesting. So I see a bunch of number 2s, which tells me that you are quite well informed, and also a bunch of 3s, the duck from the non-existent horror film of 1927. So those of you who voted for 2, an early biohazard suit, were correct. A doctor wore this during the Black Death in the 1600s to protect himself from germs. Now that is a mask that would make it hard to communicate. Plague doctors stuffed the long beak with medicinal herbs to try to protect themselves from infection. Can you imagine being sick with the plague, waiting for the doctor to come help you, and seeing this when he came in the room? You'd think you were having a fever dream. So our masks are not quite so bad as that. But to bring it back to writing, just as we don't want to wear a mask when we talk to people because it gets in the way of communicating, we also don't want our writing to wear a mask. In the interest of clarity, we can think of editing as a process of unmasking. Peeling the mask off bad writing reveals what we intended to communicate all along. It helps us to tell stories, to express ourselves clearly, and to write concisely. So how do you peel the mask off writing to reveal what you wanted to communicate in the first place? We can start to peel away the mask by asking a series of questions. The first question that I suggest you ask as you revise your work is, why did we write this? Particularly when we're talking about professional writing and writing in the sciences, we can rephrase that first question to, what do you want? What did you want to discover when you began this work? What did you want to discover when you began the work that you're writing about? And the reason we ask that question of ourselves is that when writers convey their curiosity to their readers, readers will follow suit. So how do we convey curiosity to our readers? Well, the best way to convey our curiosity to our readers so they can share it and become curious too is if we start our writing with a question rather than an objective. So start with a question. That question might be, what did I want to find out when I started this work? Or what was the gap in knowledge that I wanted to bridge through my research? Let's look at an example from a published article. So this is from the beginning of an article in which the authors are explaining why they undertook their research. And they say, most of the earlier researchers have studied the impact of mulches, either organic or inorganic in nature, on 1, 2, or at best 3 of beneficial effects, but hardly anybody attempted to study all the beneficial aspects of different types of mulches, including agrotextiles. So the researchers successfully identify a knowledge gap, a gap that made them curious and prompted their work. So when we share our curiosity, we begin a story arc, and stories we know engage readers. So a classic story arc is described as having a conflict leading to a resolution, leading to some kind of change. And that's a story arc that applies as well to short stories as it does to scientific writing. When we're writing about our scientific work, that story arc could be understood as starting with the question we wanted to answer, followed by what we discovered, and ending with what we concluded and how it changed our understanding. That is the conflict resolution and change arc as we use it for scientific and professional writing. And as we know, the story arc is what engages our readers. So we want to dramatize this arc from the question we wanted to answer to what we discovered to what we concluded and how it changed our understanding. So let's look again at that excerpt that we saw just a minute ago. Now, we noted that the authors engaged the reader's curiosity by describing the knowledge gap that sparked their interest. That's great. But let's look at what they wrote at the end of that same paragraph. So as you can see highlighted in yellow, they finish by saying, a field experiment was therefore undertaken. So we saw something to praise in the first part of this paragraph. The writers conveyed their curiosity to the readers effectively by describing the knowledge gap they wanted to bridge through their research. But at the end of the paragraph, there's a problem. Look at that last sentence. A field experiment was therefore undertaken. Immediately, we hear a shift in tone. Suddenly, it's as if the writers donned 19th century top hats and are writing with scratchy nibbed ink pens instead of 21st century laptops. That's partly because they use that very formal, pompous therefore. That therefore is totally unnecessary and clutters up the sentence. Worse, the writers disappear behind the passive voice. The passive voice masks their identities. So you might ask, why is that a problem? Lots of scientific writing is written in the passive voice. Well, lots of scientific writing could be better than it is. Let me show you how you can edit the sentence to make it more engaging and more transparent. To do this, let's ask another question. Our first question was, why did we write this? Sharing our curiosity with our readers starts a story arc that they will want to follow. But every story needs a protagonist, a hero. Who is a hero? A hero is someone who takes action. So our second question is, who is taking action? If we're writing a story, we need to acknowledge who is doing the doing. So here's that sentence again. A field experiment was therefore undertaken. We'll edit out that old-fashioned therefore right away. So we're left with a field experiment was undertaken. It's better now, but that passive voice is still masking the active subject, the hero of this sentence. So let's try unmasking some possible heroes. So some of those possibilities are, our team undertook a field experiment. We undertook a field experiment. Researchers from Johns Hopkins University undertook a field experiment. I undertook a field experiment. Now your story has a hero. Or heroes, if of course it's more than one researcher, but regardless, subjects who are taking action. Suddenly the reader is intrigued. There is a person, the writer, the researchers, who are moving this story toward its conclusion. As William Zinsser wrote, I is the most interesting element in any story. Acknowledge who is doing the research, and your reader will want to follow your story to its conclusion. So your first question was, why did I write this article? And your second question is, who is taking action in this article? And with our third question, we're going to move a little deeper into the sentence. So the third question is, what's the active subject in this sentence? Just as we tend to obscure the identity of researchers in science articles, science writers often use the passive voice to describe their findings. The effect is deadening. So let's do a quick recap of what the passive voice is. So here are a couple of examples. An active sentence might read, researchers analyzed the samples. And I note that that takes 4 words to say. And the pattern is subject to verb to object, or if it's easier for you to think of this way, without the grammatical terms, actor, action, and then the thing that is acted upon. Now the passive voice, on the other hand, might read like, the samples were analyzed by researchers, which, as you'll note, is 6 words rather than 4. So the object, the pattern goes object, verb, and subject, or acted upon, verb, and actor. I think of this as I think of the passive sentence as a sentence in which there's no active subject at the start of the sentence, but a verb happens anyway. Now, many instructors will tell you that there are times when the passive voice may be acceptable, but it's a lot better for writers to try to avoid the passive altogether. To write the clearest possible sentence, start with the active subject, followed immediately by a verb, followed by the object of the action. So there you have it. There's the active sentence, starting with the active subject, followed by a verb, followed by an object. Think of it as who or what did it, followed by what they did, followed by what happened. So it's a more natural chronological progression. So let's look at another set. So again, an active sentence might be, iodine stained the starch. Again, 4 words, subject, verb, object, actor, action acted upon, and then the passive voice, the starch was stained with iodine. Again, 6 words rather than 4, and the chronological order of the sentence doesn't quite make sense because the thing that is creating the staining is the iodine, and therefore that should come at the first part of the sentence. When we write the starch was stained, we don't have a story, we have a mystery. The identity of the active subject is masked from the reader, leaving the reader confused. They've lost the thread of our story. Now, if you include with iodine in that sentence, as I have in this example, that would still be passive, but it would have identified the active subject, though at the end of the sentence. However, as I said, the order of the information is confusing because the active subject comes at the very end. It's also more cluttered. It takes more words to write in the passive voice. So as we can see, 4 words to 6 words. And generally, we want to opt for shorter sentences because we don't want to bother our reader unnecessarily with unnecessary words, particularly ones that are going to confuse us. So let's look at an example from an actual article. So here is a complicated passive sentence. Errors in environmental engineering decision-making are compounded by the measurement imprecision, voids and gaps in observations, practical obstacles, e.g., no access to private property and physical barriers, inconsistencies in measured and modeled results, and the inability to understand what the information means, i.e., structural uncertainty. I think we can agree that a sentence like that leaves readers confused. So how can we fix it? Let's try a couple of approaches. First, we could leave the sentence pretty much as it is, revising the start of the sentence to begin with the active subject. So that would be number 1. And that sentence might read, measurement in precision, voids and gaps in observations, practical obstacles, e.g., no access to private property and physical barriers, inconsistency in measured and modeled results, and the inability to understand what the information means, i.e., structural uncertainty, cause errors in environmental decision-making. Now, that is still a mouthful, and it is still hard to find the verb that is connected to the active subject there, although it is connected. So another more radical approach is to rewrite the sentence more fundamentally, starting with the implied active subject, or rather I should say the active subject that's implied, the researchers. So that's my second example. Researchers make poor decisions when they measure imprecisely, allow voids or gaps in their observations, face practical obstacles, e.g., no access to private property and physical barriers, or inconsistencies in measured and modeled results, and can't understand what the information means, i.e., structural uncertainty. As a reader, which of these two do you find easier to understand? Will you answer in the chat either 1 or 2? And I'll just see what the consensus seems to be. Lots of 2s, a few question marks and 2s. Or maybe that's with reference to another question. All right, we've got 1. Hank Deaton, you prefer number 1. But you are the only one. Everybody else goes for number 2. All right, thank you for that feedback. So we've asked, why did we write this? We've asked who is the hero of the story, and we've asked who is the active subject of the sentence. Now let's ask, is that a noun or is it a verb in disguise? What I'm getting at here is the concept of nominalization. Nominalization is when a writer uses a noun form of a verb instead of the verb itself. It's often quite ugly to listen to. So a little like the old-fashioned, therefore we edited out earlier, writers use nominalization when they want to sound more formal. Or it's just maybe a sloppy tick, also possible. One way or another, it's something we want to edit out. So let's look at some examples of nominalization. So the verb form of the word is on the left-hand column, and the noun form, the nominalization, is in the right-hand column. So we can see that the verb move is nominalized to movement. The verb use is nominalized to utilization. The verb differ is nominalized to difference. The verb suggest to suggestion, interact to interaction, develop to development. So you might notice that the nominalizations often end in ENT or ION. So that is a good tell if you are looking to see whether you've got nominalizations in your sentence. Look for those endings. So you might look at this list and think defensively that these nouns are perfectly all right. And they are legitimate nouns and writers use them all the time. That's true. But when you edit your own work, looking for nominalizations can show you where your writing is inefficient or indirect. Remember, to make the experience of reading our work enjoyable and easy for other people, we need to be clear and concise. Here are some examples of nominalization from recent articles. So here's one. Environmental engineers often have agreement on which moral principles apply to a project or action, e.g., protecting the public from hazardous substances. Again, with the e.g., let's just edit that out. But you'll see that agreement is a nominalization of the verb to agree. So let's see what we could do with that. So to make that sentence better as an editor, you would note the nominalization and then revert the nominalization into its verb form. So your sentence would read, environmental engineers often agree on which moral principles apply to a project or action, etc. All right, let's look at another example. So here's another example of nominalization. Expansion of healthcare can lead to a reduction of violent crime. So here we have two nominalizations in the same sentence, and we really don't know who is doing the doing, right? There's no person identified here. And altogether, this is a kind of muddy and sort of pompous sentence. So let's see what we could do with it. So the original, again, is expansion of healthcare can lead to a reduction of violent crime. It takes 11 words to say that. So if we edit it out by making those nominalizations into verbs, you will see we have much shorter sentences, lovelier sentences. Expanding healthcare can reduce violent crime, 6 words, or 9 words. So the 9-word example is when we expand healthcare, we can reduce violent crime. So admittedly, it's a little bit longer than the 6-word example, but we've placed the emphasis on the active participants and the impact of their actions with a parallel repetition of we. This in itself is a compelling story in one relatively short sentence. So this is kind of an example of just what a nice bit of editing can do. Suddenly we have people involved in the sentence, people taking agency and making changes for the better. Don't you love that? I love that. All right. So we've just asked, is that a noun or a verb in disguise? But there's another kind of nominalization that I want to talk to you about, and you might spot it when editing your own work. And this is adjectival nominalization. So adjective nominalization is when you turn an adjective into a noun. So let's look at some examples of those. So you can see the adjective different becomes the noun difference. Difficult becomes difficulty. Able becomes ability. Capable becomes capability. Similar becomes similarity. So as you edit your work, if you notice those words ending with ity, of course, not all of them do, but many of them do, you might think to yourself, interesting, I wonder if that is an adjective nominalization. Maybe I can revise that sentence to make it more concise and clear for my readers. So let's try to edit this sentence to avoid nominalization. So the sentence reads, there was a difference between the findings of the 2 studies. So that's 11 words. So show me in the chat what you could do with that to make that nominalization go away. and turn difference into a verb or an adjective. That's another possibility. All right, let's see. Make this sentence better. All right, I see the findings of the two studies differed. The findings of the two studies were different. The two studies differed in their findings. The findings of the two studies were different. Okay, we've got a really nice range there. You can see there are a lot of solutions to this possible problem. So I came up with some of the same ones. The two studies' findings were different, 5 words. The two studies found different results, 6 words. The two studies' results differed, 5 words, or the findings of the two studies differed, 7 words. So, oh yes, and I see also somebody's just chimed in with, we have different findings in 2 studies. Very nice. Then you have yourself in the sentence too. That's good. You've got a hero. So as you can see, there's a lot to do, and you can make a change that shortens your sentence and makes it more concise and clear. So let's try this one. Our engineering team has the capability to research and build an effective solution. So our engineering team has the capability. You hear that ITY ending, right? You know this is a nominalization. What can you do to make a better sentence? Can you put it in the chat? I'm just waiting for some to come through. All right, Lee. Our engineering team is capable of researching and building an effective solution. Yes. How about some more? The engineering team can research and deliver an effective solution. From Michael. Thank you. We can just lose capable entirely, can't we? It's kind of unnecessary if you just use can. All right, so you guys came up with the same solutions as me. You could lose capable altogether and bring 13 words down to 10, or use capable and bring it down to 12. So we're not always going for shortening, but shorter is generally better, particularly in scientific writing. All right, so let's move along. To conclude our discussion of nominalizations, let's just sum up. Nominalizations occur when we use the noun form of a verb or the noun form of an adjective. We can spot their common giveaway endings, ION, ENT, and ITY. Though these nominalizations, verbs and adjectives in disguise, aren't errors, they are a tell. They indicate that we can edit these sentences to make them more direct and less cluttered, giving our readers an easier and more pleasurable reading experience so they can focus on the story we are telling. So the last question I want to ask you to ask yourself when you're editing your work is that the best verb? So good writing relies on verbs. And you can see from the earlier part of this presentation that focusing on verb forms can really make your writing better. The best writing relies on the best verbs. And so what makes one verb better than another? A strong verb is precise and descriptive. A weak verb is just there in a supporting role. In the interests of clarity and concision, we can look at the verbs in our sentences and ask ourselves if they are the best verbs for the job. Let's look at this sentence. Okay, so researchers conducted an investigation into maternal mortality rates in the city. Now, conducted in that top sentence is a weak verb. It's not actually doing very much. And in fact, what we notice is that it's propping up a nominalization, which is investigation, right? So we notice that the noun investigation is really a verb in disguise. So we can revise the sentence by losing the weak verb conducted, returning the nominalization investigation into its strong verb form, investigate, and then we can revise the sentence to be more direct and, yes, concise. So once we've done that, the second sentence is what we have. Researchers investigated maternal mortality rates in the city. So we've gone from 11 words to 8. Yay. Conducted is on the list of notoriously weak verbs. So on the left here, we have some weak verbs. On the right, we have some strong ones. And the list is longer, but notoriously weak verbs include occur, affect, facilitate, perform, conduct, and implement. And as you're reading that list of weak verbs, you're probably thinking, well, Sarah, come on. I mean, a conductor can only conduct. That is the verb that we use to describe conducting. And a musician can only perform, though she or he can also play their instrument. So there are times when these weak verbs are in fact our best bet. But many times, as I said, they're propping up other verbs or nouns that could be doing the work themselves. It's funny that when we talk about these things in a sentence, it's almost like we're describing a drama with characters. So weak verbs, kind of parasitic, not really doing much, just, lying around on the couch. Strong verbs, very able to do all the heavy lifting if we let them by freeing them from nominalization. So strong verbs can include modify, accomplish, create, increase, decrease, invade, react, inhibit, disrupt, accelerate, and migrate. To get back to William Zinsser, who said that clear writing is the result of a lot of tinkering, he also wrote, rewriting is the essence of writing well. It's where the game is won or lost. Most writers don't initially say what they want to say or say it as well as they could. The newly hatched sentence almost always has something wrong with it. It's not clear, it's not logical, it's verbose, it's clunky, it's pretentious, it's boring, it's full of clutter. Editing your own work, as I said, is harder than editing other people's. You wrote what you wrote because it came naturally to you. The words on the page sound okay to you because they're familiar to you. To defamiliarize your writing, the conventional advice is to set the work aside and to try not to edit it until you've forgotten what you wrote so you can read it as a stranger would. But many of us don't have that leisure. Instead, I suggest that the first thing you do is to print out your pages and look at them. Don't read them, just look. Look at the relative length of your paragraphs. Are any much longer than the others? You may have crammed more than one topic into that paragraph. Mark it for later so you can see if you can divide it into 2 or 3 smaller paragraphs. Each paragraph gives you the opportunity for a topic sentence and a concluding sentence, the 2 that readers will focus on, arguably the only 2 that they will remember out of that whole sentence. That whole paragraph. So more paragraphs translate into more memorable content. Next, run your finger down the first words of each paragraph. Do you start paragraphs the same way time and again? For example, is the word the or the article a starting every paragraph? If so, mark those repetitions for later revision. Then do the same for the final word of each paragraph. That's as close as you can get to defamiliarizing your work. Simply look at it and look at the physical manifestations of your words and paragraphs on the page. Are the paragraphs too long, too short? And do you start and end with the same words? Next, I recommend that you read the work aloud. So sit alone in a room by yourself and actually force yourself to read your work aloud. It can be a humbling experience. For the first time, you may hear word echoes that you didn't notice while you were writing, word repetition, or sentence and phrase repetitions. Perhaps you structure your sentences with the same kind of but clause 2 times out of 3. You will only hear it when you read it aloud. So read aloud with a pencil in hand and listen for those echoes. After that, there's no help for it. You'll have to start to tinker in earnest. But if you ask yourself the questions we've discussed, which are, to recap, why did we write this? Who is taking action? Who is taking action in the sentence? Is that really a noun? And is that the best verb to use? You will begin to peel away the clutter to reveal the clear ideas and compelling story beneath the mask. So thank you so much for listening to me talk about editing. It's one of my favorite subjects. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or follow up. Thank you very much. I think Haley is going to ask for questions.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great presentation. Now is the time for questions. So please type your questions in the chat window and I will read them out loud for Sarah to answer. The first question, do you have any references that you can suggest?
Absolutely. So I really like the book that William Zinsser wrote called On Writing Well. It was in print for over 50 years. You can get a secondhand or a new copy very readily. He's a little chatty. The book is divided up into chapters with themes like writing memoir. You have to be prepared to just enjoy the pleasure of his voice. It's not as if he's giving you bullet points for good writing, but if you stick with it, you will learn a lot. So William Zinsser is one of the great heroes of writing. He taught at Yale for many years and was a beloved writing instructor. I only know him through his work. I didn't know him personally, but I really recommend him. There are also classic guides to writing and grammar, such as Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. I think they hold up amazingly well and completely opposite to Zinsser's approach. Strunk and White are extremely concise. And so they just give a brief paragraph on each of the writing points that they highlight, and you can kind of take it from there. So they don't go on for long. It's not a book to, read in the bath or read at your leisure, but you can dip in and out of it with pleasure.
Excellent, thank you. Lee asks if they can get a copy of the slides. Now, Lee, this webinar is recorded. Sarah, I'll leave that up to you if you'd like to share, a PDF.
Okay.
Participants.
Lee, you can see my JHU email address here on the screen. If you'd really like the slides, I'm happy to send you a presentation link.
When is it okay to leave the words ending in ENT, ION, and ITY, or should they just try to eliminate them as much as possible?
I don't know if there's a clear rule for when to use them, but I think that when you're editing your work, as I said, the real reason to notice them is that they are often a tell that you have a kind of cluttered sentence with unnecessary words. So look for those nominalizations and then look closely at the sentence and see if you've got weak verbs in play that can be replaced by strong verbs, or if you've got nouns which you could replace with verbs for a more active sentence. So it's more of an indication that something may be wrong than it is a definite black mark or a red mark if you think about your teacher's pens in the margin of your work.
All right, thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for attending.